I thought I was taking a simple shortcut through Death Valley to save 40 minutes on our honeymoon road trip instead. I spent the next 2 years watching my husband and myself slowly die in America's most unforgiving desert, surviving on insects, cave water, and the kind of love that either saves you or destroys you completely. But here's what haunts me most about those 614 days of hell. What if I told you we were never more than 12 miles from safety? The morning sun painted the Nevada highway in shades of amber and gold as Marcus Chen adjusted the rearview mirror of their aging Subaru Outback. In the passenger seat, his wife Elena hummed along to a folk song on the radio, her fingers tracing patterns on the dusty window as endless desert stretched beyond the glass. They had been married for 3 years, and this cross-country road trip was meant to be their delayed honeymoon, a chance to reconnect after Marcus's grueling residency at Johns Hopkins and Elena's demanding work as a wildlife photographer. According to the GPS, we should hit Bakersfield by evening, Marcus said, glancing at the dashboard display. We can grab dinner at that Italian place you bookmarked. Elena smiled, her dark hair catching the morning light. Perfect. I want to capture the sunset over the Mojave first, though. The light here is incredible. She held up her camera, a professional Canon that had been her constant companion for the past decade. Through its lens, she had documented everything from Arctic foxes to Amazon rainforest canopies. But something about this vast American desert called to her artistic soul. They had left their cramped Chicago apartment 5 days earlier, driving west with no particular urgency. Marcus had just completed his emergency medicine residency, and Elena had finished a 6-month assignment in Costa Rica. For the first time in years, they had no deadlines, no obligations, just the open road and each other. The GPS indicated a shortcut through Death Valley National Park, promising to save them 40 minutes, and offering what Elena described as photo opportunities of a lifetime. Marcus, ever the cautious physician, had initially resisted. Death Valley in late August meant temperatures exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and their car's air conditioning had been making concerning noises for the past 100 miles. It's a national park, honey, Elena had reasoned. There are ranger stations, visitor centers. And look, she pointed to her phone screen. The route takes us right past the Badwater Basin. I've dreamed of photographing that salt flat since photography school. Marcus's love for his wife ultimately overruled his medical training's constant risk assessment. They had plenty of water, a full tank of gas, and the shortcut would get them to Bakersfield before the heat became unbearable. That decision would haunt them for the next 2 years. The first sign of trouble came 30 miles into Death Valley. The air conditioning wheezed, coughed, and died with a mechanical sigh that seemed to echo across the desolate landscape. Within minutes, the temperature inside the car became stifling. Marcus rolled down the windows, but the air that rushed in felt like opening an oven door. It's okay, Elena said, though sweat was already beading on her forehead. We'll be through in an hour. The GPS showed their location as a thin blue line threading through brown and yellow topography. No other cars were visible in either direction. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of black tar, heat waves creating an otherworldly shimmer that made the horizon dance and blur. 20 miles later, the engine began to overheat. Marcus pulled over at what appeared to be an abandoned rest stop, a crumbling concrete building with boarded windows and a rusted sign too faded to read. The engine hissed and steamed as he lifted the hood, revealing a radiator leak that had been slowly draining their coolant. How bad is it? Elena asked, joining him in the meager shade cast by the open hood. Marcus's medical training had taught him to deliver bad news with calm precision, but his voice betrayed his growing anxiety. The radiator's cracked. We're losing coolant faster than the engine can circulate what's left. Elena checked her phone. No signal. The GPS had gone dark when they'd stopped, leaving them with only a general sense of their location, somewhere in the vast expanse of Death Valley. They had 3 bottles of water, a bag of trail mix, and 2 protein bars. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, and the thermometer on Elena's camera bag read 128 degrees Fahrenheit. We wait for another car, Marcus decided. Someone has to come through eventually. But as the hours passed and the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the road remained empty. The silence was absolutino birds. No insects, No distant hum of civilization. Just the occasional whisper of wind across sand and the slow tick of cooling metal. As darkness fell, they made the decision that would seal their fate. They would walk. The desert night brought blessed relief from the heat, but it also brought new terrors. Temperature plummeted to near freezing, and neither Marcus nor Elena had packed for cold weather. They huddled together in the car, sharing body heat and rationing their water in careful sips. "Someone will find us tomorrow," Elena whispered, though her voice carried more hope than conviction. "Park rangers patrol these roads." Marcus had calculated their water supply obsessively. 3 bottles, roughly 1.5 liters total. In this heat, an adult needed at least 4 liters per day to avoid severe dehydration. They had perhaps 18 hours before their situation became critical. But dawn brought no rescue, only the return of crushing heat that seemed to press down on them like a physical weight. By 10 a.m., the car's interior was uninhabitable. They fashioned a crude shelter using Elena's camera bag and their spare clothes, creating a small patch of shade beside the abandoned building. "We need to start walking at night," Marcus said, his medical knowledge providing grim clarity. "During the day, we'll lose too much water through perspiration." Elena nodded, though every instinct screamed against leaving the car, their last connection to the civilized world. She had photographed survival situations before, documenting drought-stricken communities and climate refugees. But she had always been an observer. Now she was the subject of her own most terrifying shoot. That second night, they began their journey deeper into Death Valley. Walking through the desert at night was like traveling through an alien world. Elena's photographer's eye captured details that would haunt her dreams. The way starlight transformed sand dunes into silver sculptures. How shadows pooled in rocky outcroppings like spilled ink. The eerie silence broken only by their footsteps and labored breathing. They followed the road for 3 nights, hoping to reach a ranger station or encounter another vehicle. Marcus had torn pages from Elena's notebook to create a trail of paper markers, ensuring they could find their way back to the car if needed. But as their water dwindled and weakness set in, the car became an increasingly distant memory. On the 4th day, delirious from heat and dehydration, they stumbled upon what seemed like a mirage, a small cave system carved into a sandstone cliff face. The caves offered blessed shade and, miraculously, a tiny spring that seeped mineral-rich water from deep underground. "We're saved," Elena sobbed, plunging her face into the cool water. But Marcus's medical training recognized the cruel mathematics of their situation. The spring produced perhaps a cup of water per hour, enough to prevent immediate death, but not enough to sustain them indefinitely. They decided to make the cave their base camp while Marcus ventured out at night, searching for help or supplies. It was a decision born of desperation and the naive belief that rescue would come within days. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The human body, Marcus learned, was capable of horrific adaptations when survival demanded it. Their first month in the cave system was a masterclass in gradual starvation. They caught and ate insects, lizards, and eventually learned to identify edible desert plants. Elena's photography skills proved unexpectedly useful. Her trained eye for detail helped them distinguish between poisonous and safe vegetation. They established routines that maintained sanity in the face of impossible circumstances. Elena would wake before dawn to check the water collection system they had crafted from her camera equipment. Marcus would venture out during the coolest hours, searching for food and materials. They shared stories during the crushing heat of midday, hidden deep in their cave where temperatures remained just bearable. "Tell me about the wedding we'll have when we get out of here," Elena would whisper during their worst moments. "A real wedding, not that courthouse ceremony." Marcus would describe elaborate fantasies, a garden ceremony in spring, Elena's family flying in from Portugal, a honeymoon in Santorini where she could photograph sunrise over the Aegean Sea. These dreams became their anchor to sanity, proof that a world beyond sand and stone still existed. But as autumn passed into winter, and winter into spring, the stories grew shorter and their silences longer. Elena began showing signs of severe psychological stress during their 8th month in the desert. She would wake screaming from nightmares, convinced that rescue helicopters were circling overhead. She began talking to her camera as if it were a person, conducting elaborate conversations with the equipment that had once been her livelihood. "It's normal," Marcus assured himself, recognizing the symptoms of prolonged isolation and malnutrition. The mind creates companions when it's starved for social contact. But he was experiencing his own breakdown. Medical knowledge that had once felt like a superpower now became a curse, allowing him to catalog every symptom of their slow deterioration with clinical precision. He knew their muscle mass was degrading, their immune systems failing, their organs beginning to shut down. The spring's water output had decreased as the seasons changed, forcing them to venture farther from their cave in search of moisture. They learned to collect dew on cloth, to find water in barrel cacti, to extract every possible calorie from desert survival foods. Marcus began leaving Elena alone for days at a time, ranging farther into the desert in increasingly desperate searches for help. Each expedition left him weaker, more disoriented, less likely to find his way back to their cave. During one such expedition, 13 months into their ordeal, he became lost. Elena waited 7 days for Marcus to return. On the 8th day, she began talking to her camera in earnest, describing her situation as if documenting it for some future viewer. Day 398, she would whisper into the device, though its batteries had died months earlier. Marcus has been gone for 8 days. I've rationed the water, but the spring is giving less and less. I think I might be the only one left. The possibility that Marcus was dead had occurred to her many times, but accepting it felt like accepting her own death sentence. She was not strong enough to survive alone, not anymore. The knowledge settled over her like the desert heat, inescapable, suffocating, final. But humans, Elena discovered, possess reserves of strength that reveal themselves only in the darkest moments. She began making her own expeditions. Following Marcus's most recent trail markers, she found evidence of his presence. Scraps of cloth, footprints in sand, carefully arranged stones that served as navigation aids. On the 15th day of his absence, she found him. Marcus was alive, barely. Elena discovered him in a narrow canyon 3 miles from their cave, delirious with fever and severely dehydrated. He had fallen while climbing a rock face, breaking his left leg in 2 places. Unable to walk, he had crawled into whatever shade he could find and waited to die. "Elena," he whispered when she found him, "is that really you? Or am I hallucinating again?" She had lost so much weight that she barely recognized herself in reflecting pool water. But Marcus looked far worse. His clothes hung like tattered rags. His skin was burned and cracked. His eyes had sunk deep into their sockets. The broken leg was grotesquely swollen, infected, requiring immediate medical attention they could not provide. The mathematics of their situation were brutal and inescapable. Elena could not carry Marcus back to the cave. He could not walk. They had no materials for a proper splint or stretcher. Moving him would likely kill him, but leaving him would certainly kill him. "You have to go," Marcus said, his medical training providing clarity even in delirium. "Leave me here. Find help. Come back." "I'm not leaving you," Elena replied, though they both knew she lacked the strength for a rescue mission. She was barely surviving herself, existing on perhaps 500 calories per day and never quite enough water. They faced the impossible choice that would define the next phase of their survival: die together or die apart. Elena chose a third option. She stayed with Marcus in the canyon, sharing her meager supplies and creating a more substantial shelter using salvaged materials from their cave. It was a decision that should have killed them both within days. Instead, it led to their first miracle in 14 months. 3 days after Elena found Marcus, a flash flood swept through their canyon, a rare but devastating desert phenomenon. The wall of water would have killed them instantly if Elena hadn't noticed the subtle signs she had learned during her nature photography career. The sudden stillness in the air, the way birds fled in a specific direction, the distant rumble that sounded almost like thunder. She dragged Marcus to higher ground just minutes before the flood arrived, watching in terror as their makeshift shelter was swept away. But when the water receded, it left behind something precious: pools of fresh rainwater, collected in natural rock basins, more water than they had seen in over a year. The flood also revealed something else: the scattered remains of other travelers who had not been as fortunate. Among the debris left by the flood, Elena discovered backpacks, water bottles, and camping equipment from previous desert casualties. Some items were old and weathered, others disturbingly recent. A driver's license dated just 6 months earlier belonged to a young woman named Sarah Cheno, relation to Marcus despite the shared surname. The supplies were a godsend. Proper water containers, dehydrated food, a first aid kit that allowed Elena to properly set Marcus's leg. But they also carried the weight of tragedy, constant reminders that they were not the first to be claimed by Death Valley and would not be the last. Elena found a journal among Sarah Chen's belongings, documenting her final days in the desert. The entries grew increasingly desperate and incoherent, ending abruptly with a note that chilled Elena to her core. "If you find this, please tell my family I tried to walk out. I'm going to try one more time to reach the road." That journal became Elena's obsession. She read it countless times, comparing Sarah's experience to their own, looking for clues about escape routes or survival techniques. But mostly, it served as a warning about the desert's ability to break even the most determined spirit. Their second winter in Death Valley was both easier and harder than the first. Easier because they now had proper equipment and a deeper understanding of desert survival. Harder because hope was becoming a luxury they could no longer afford. Marcus's leg had healed poorly, leaving him with a permanent limp and chronic pain. Elena had developed a persistent cough that she suspected was related to months of breathing dust and sleeping in caves. They were alive, but their bodies were breaking down in ways that would have permanent consequences. The psychological toll was even worse. Elena had stopped talking to her camera, replacing those conversations with long periods of absolute silence. Marcus would sometimes go days without speaking, lost in medical calculations about their deteriorating condition. They had developed a cruel expertise in desert survival that was useless anywhere else in the world. Elena could identify edible insects by their wing patterns. Marcus could diagnose dehydration stages by the color and consistency of urine. They had become the world's most qualified experts on a subject no one should ever need to learn. During their darkest moments, they discussed suicide. The conversation came up naturally, clinically, the way other couples might discuss vacation plans or home renovations. They had enough pharmaceutical supplies from various backpack finds to make it peaceful if they chose that option. "Not yet," became their mantra. "Not today." 18 months into their ordeal, they encountered their first living human beings since the breakdown. Elena was collecting water during pre-dawn hours when she heard voices echoing across the desert trial, voices, not hallucinations. She crept toward the sound and discovered two men setting up what appeared to be a temporary research station near a distant rock formation. Her first instinct was to run toward them, screaming for help. But months of survival had taught her caution. She observed from a distance, noting their equipment, their behavior, their apparent purpose. They were clearly not search and rescue personnel. Their gear was scientific rather than emergency-focused, and they seemed to be conducting geological surveys rather than looking for missing persons. Elena realized with growing horror that if she revealed herself, they might not have the resources or inclination to help. Worse, they might report her location to authorities, triggering a rescue attempt that would force her to leave Marcus behind. She made the agonizing decision to observe without contact, gathering intelligence about their mission and schedule. The researchers, Elena learned through careful surveillance, were conducting a 3-day mineral survey for a mining company. They had arrived by helicopter, which would return on the 4th day to extract them and their samples. Elena spent 2 days formulating a plan that might save both her and Marcus. The helicopter represented their best chance of rescue in 18 months, but reaching it would require perfect timing and considerable luck. Marcus was too weak to make the journey to the research site. His infected leg had never properly healed, and he was running a persistent fever that Elena suspected indicated systemic infection. Any attempt to move him would likely prove fatal. "You have to go without me," Marcus insisted when Elena explained the situation. "Signal the helicopter, get rescued, send help back for me." They both knew that sending help back was unlikely to succeed. In 18 months, no one had come looking for them. Their car had presumably been found and towed, their disappearance filed away as another Death Valley statistic. A rescue operation would require precise coordinates, expensive resources, and bureaucratic approval that might take weeks to obtain. Marcus might not survive another week. Elena made a choice that would define the rest of her life. On the morning when the helicopter was scheduled to return for the research team, she began the most difficult journey of their entire ordeal. carrying Marcus toward the extraction point. She had fashioned a crude stretcher from backpack materials and camping poles, but Marcus weighed nearly nothing after 18 months of starvation. The greater challenge was navigating rocky terrain while pulling a sledge that caught on every obstacle. The journey that should have taken 3 hours stretched into 8. By the time they reached visual range of the research site, Elena could hear helicopter rotors in the distance. Marcus was unconscious, his fever so high that Elena feared he was already dying. She faced a final, impossible choice: abandon the stretcher and run toward the helicopter alone, or stay with Marcus and watch their rescue opportunity disappear into the sky. She chose a third option that surprised even herself. Elena began removing pieces of clothing and equipment, arranging them in patterns that would be visible from above. She used her photographer's understanding of color and contrast to create signals that might catch a pilot's attention: bright fabric against dark stone, reflective surfaces angled toward the sky, geometric patterns that clearly indicated human activity. Then she lay down beside Marcus and waited. The helicopter pilot noticed Elena's signals during his final sweep before departing. What he saw through his windshield defied immediate explanation: carefully arranged clothing and equipment forming arrow patterns and SOS signals. 2 human figures lying motionless beside them. The rescue that followed was swift and professional, but Elena remembered only fragments: the overwhelming noise of rotor blades, strangers' voices shouting medical jargon, the sensation of being lifted into the air after 20 months of never being more than a few feet above ground level. Marcus was unconscious during the helicopter ride to Las Vegas Medical Center. Elena drifted in and out of awareness, her body finally allowing itself to shut down now that survival was no longer her responsibility. She would later learn that they had been missing for 614 days. Search and rescue operations had lasted only 6 weeks before being officially suspended. Their families had held memorial services. Elena's photography equipment company had created a scholarship in her name. They had been declared legally dead for over a year. Recovery was a slow, painful process that proved almost as challenging as survival had been. Elena's body weight had dropped to 89 pounds, nearly 60 pounds below her normal weight. Marcus required multiple surgeries to repair damage to his improperly healed leg and treat systemic infections that had been slowly killing him. But the physical rehabilitation was nothing compared to the psychological challenges of returning to civilization. Elena found herself unable to sleep indoors, panicking in small spaces, hoarding food and water in ways that alarmed her medical team. The constant presence of other people felt overwhelming after 20 months of seeing only Marcus. Marcus struggled with survivor's guilt and medical trauma. As a physician, he understood exactly how close they had come to death, how many times their survival had depended on pure chance rather than skill or preparation. The knowledge that they had beaten odds that killed dozens of other people each year left him questioning everything about luck, fate, and the arbitrary nature of who lives and who dies. Their families' reactions were complex mixtures of joy, relief, and barely suppressed anger. Elena's parents were grateful beyond words, but they also struggled to understand how she had made choices that put her in such danger. Marcus's mother alternated between celebration and fury, unable to comprehend why he had taken a shortcut through Death Valley when his medical training should have warned him against such risks. The couple found themselves celebrities of a sort, their story attracting media attention and book deal offers. But fame felt like another form of survival challenge, requiring different skills they had never needed to develop. 3 years after their rescue, Elena and Marcus divorced. The decision was mutual, reached after months of counseling and the gradual realization that the people who had survived Death Valley were not the same people who had taken a wrong turn in 2019. Their shared trauma had created a bond that was unbreakable, but also unbearable. "We saved each other," Elena explained to the divorce mediator. "But we also remind each other of the worst 20 months of our lives every single day." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. They had survived something that should have killed them, but survival had extracted a price that their marriage could not pay. Elena moved to Maine, where she worked as a freelance photographer specializing in landscapes that were the polar opposite of desert environments: lush forests, rocky coastlines, places where water was abundant and shade was easy to find. She never photographed deserts again. Marcus returned to emergency medicine, finding that his Death Valley experience had given him an unusual perspective on trauma and survival. He became known for his ability to remain calm during medical crises that panicked other doctors, and for his uncanny skill at diagnosing dehydration and heat-related injuries. They exchanged Christmas cards and occasional emails, but saw each other only once after the divorcee Elena's photography exhibition titled After the Desert, which featured portraits of other survivors she had interviewed and photographed. The final piece in the exhibition was a self-portrait she had taken during their last week in Death Valley, using Marcus's reflection in a piece of broken mirror she had found among the flood debris. Both of their faces were gaunt and sunburned, but their eyes held something that transcended their physical deterioration, an absolute determination to survive that had carried them through the impossible. In 2024, 5 years after their rescue, Elena received a phone call that changed her understanding of their entire ordeal. The caller was a Park Service historian who had been researching missing persons cases in Death Valley. Through careful analysis of GPS data, weather records, and geological surveys, he had reconstructed their likely path through the desert with startling precision. "Miss Chen," he said, "I need to tell you something about your location during those 20 months. You were never more than 12 miles from a paved road." The revelation was devastating. Elena learned that if they had walked due west from their original breakdown point instead of following the winding road north, they would have reached Highway 127 within 18 hours. If they had continued south from their cave system instead of exploring eastward canyons, they would have encountered a ranger station within 3 days. "But the GPS showed us in the middle of nowhere," Elena protested. "The GPS was correct about your coordinates," the historian explained. "But Death Valley is deceptive. What looks like empty wilderness on a map often has infrastructure just beyond the visible horizon. The terrain plays tricks on perception and navigation." Elena hung up the phone and sat in her main cabin, staring at the green forest outside her window. She thought about Marcus, wondered if anyone had called him with the same information. She thought about all the what-ifs that had tormented them for years, and realized they had been asking the wrong questions. They hadn't survived Death Valley through superior skill or exceptional luck. They had survived because they chose, again and again, not to give up. Even when giving up would have been reasonable, even when giving up would have ended their suffering, they had chosen to keep trying. The desert hadn't been their enemy, had been their teacher, showing them reserves of strength and love they never knew they possessed. Elena picked up her phone and, for the first time in 3 years, called Marcus. "Did you hear?" she asked when he answered. "About the roads?" "Yeah, I heard." They were quiet for a long moment, processing the weight of information that simultaneously made their ordeal seem more tragic and more miraculous. "Do you regret it?" Elena asked finally. Marcus was quiet for so long that she wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the same calm certainty that had sustained them through their darkest desert nights. "No," he said. "I regret the pain we caused our families. I regret the years we lost afterward. I regret that our marriage couldn't survive what we survived together. But I don't regret the 20 months that showed me who we really were when everything else was stripped away." Elena smiled, looking out at her forest sanctuary. "Me neither." They talked for 2 hours, sharing stories of their separate lives, their ongoing recovery, their different paths toward healing. When they finally hung up, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced since their rescue: complete peace with their choices. The desert had taken almost everything from them: their health, their marriage, their old understanding of safety and certainty. But it had also given them something invaluable: absolute proof that human love and determination could survive anything, even Death Valley. The couple's story became legendary among desert survival experts, not because of their navigation skills or wilderness expertise, but because of their refusal to abandon hope or each other. Park rangers now use their case study in training programs, emphasizing the importance of staying with disabled vehicles and the dangers of attempting to walk out of desert situations. But the real lesson of their survival was simpler and more profound. In the face of impossible circumstances, the choice to continue loving and protecting each other had been more powerful than any survival technique or emergency equipment. They had walked into Death Valley as tourists, and emerged as something else entirely, people who knew, with absolute certainty, that they were capable of surviving anything the world could throw at them. That knowledge, terrible and beautiful in equal measure, would stay with them forever.